Throughout the Duggar family, John David and his wife Abbie were always regarded as one of the most composed and sensible pairs. Their love was based on silent devotion, faith, and trust. Unlike several of John's siblings, they chose to raise their two young kids in a quiet and loving household in Arkansas rather than chasing fame. Both of them genuinely thought that every blessing came in God's time, and their love story had been one of understanding and patience. However, with the birth of their second daughter, John David's heart started to shift. There was no doubt that he loved his girls very much, but he was also experiencing a developing need that he had never experienced before. The wish was for a son. One day, a young son who would continue the Duggar name, share his passions, and refer to him as Dad when he was repairing airplanes or assisting with equipment. He reminded himself that it had nothing to do with pride. It had to do with heritage. Abbie was sensitive to her husband's emotions. She had witnessed the way John David's face brightened whenever Jim Bob discussed the value of producing strong, devout men, or how he would gaze at his brothers as they played with their sons. The Duggars had always upheld traditional family values, and although Abbie never said it aloud, she could see that having a son had a certain unspoken weight in this household. Abbie experienced a mixture of excitement and anxiety when she learned she was expecting her third child. With tears of joy in her eyes, she rushed into John David's arms. He reacted with sheer enthusiasm. "This time it's going to be a boy, I just know it," he muttered as he gave her a hard hug. From that moment on, the baby became the center of attention in their home. Even before the baby's gender was confirmed, the sisters would sit next to Abbie, stroking her abdomen and referring to it as baby brother. Their home's walls were covered in decorations that John David had meticulously chosen, baby names written on sticky notes and laughter. He even began painting the nursery blue because he thought so, not because they were positive. God will give them a son this time, he believed. Abbie did her best to remain composed and upbeat during the pregnancy. While caring for their girls and running the household, she experienced back pain, sleepless nights, and morning sickness. She did, however, frequently find herself wondering in her quiet times, was it incorrect to have such a definite hope? What if God had a different plan? She had experienced enough life to know that blessings don't always appear as we would hope. John David would kindly soothe her whenever she attempted to express her worries. "Keep your faith, my love. Our hearts are known to God. He knows what we need," Abbie said, but she secretly questioned whether John's trust had become expectation. Every time someone brought up the prospect of a boy, she could see the gleam in his eyes. It was a common joke among the Duggar sisters-in-law, cousins, and even family friends. "Perhaps this is the little Duggar boy that everyone has been waiting for." Abbie would chuckle, but she could feel the pressure quietly mounting inside. As the months passed, the anticipation grew until it was nearly too much to handle. John David planned how to reorganize the rooms after the baby was born, and spent his evenings making little repairs around the house, saying he wanted to embrace his son in the same way his father had. He even refurbished an ancient wooden rocking chair. Abbie was impressed by his commitment as she watched him work, but she kept thinking, what if it's not a boy? During prayer nights and supper conversations, the family got together and talked nonstop about the impending baby. No matter what, Michelle Duggar reminded everyone that children are God's gift. Every baby is a blessing, but yes, it's been a while since we've had a little Duggar boy in the family, Jim Bob said with a proud smile. The group erupted in laughter, but Abbie remembered that one line for a long time. She began to detect minor changes in herself. She was now experiencing a mixture of dread and excitement. She would sit by herself in the nursery in the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, her hands gently resting on her abdomen. She prayed in a whisper, not for a girl or a boy, but for serenity. She prayed that their hearts would remain thankful no matter what. However, John David was too preoccupied with his dreams to notice her silent concern. He frequently discussed how he would teach his son to fix engines, fly airplanes, and live by faith. Although he spoke with love, there was also a sense of expectation in his remarks. Never wanting to take away his happiness, Abbie nodded and smiled. The family's excitement peaked as her due date drew near. Already, the Duggar siblings were preparing for yet another significant social media announcement. The house was a riot of laughing, gifts, baby outfits, and pink and blue decor. The night before Abbie went into labor, the couple sat together in the nursery while their children chose little onesies for their soon-to-be sibling, and John David's mother, Michelle, assisted Abbie in packing her hospital bag. Under the warm glow of a nightlight, John David clutched Abbie's hand while muttering Thanksgiving prayers. He smiled as he continued, "Tomorrow is the day. It is something I can sense. God is blessing us with a son." Abbie gazed at him tenderly, her emotions divided between fear and faith. She was desperate to believe him. She desired for his eyes to brighten with the happiness he had been envisioning. However, she knew deep down that happiness should be based on what they already had rather than what they got. Her thoughts was racing that night as she struggled to fall asleep. She was reminded that life itself was a marvel by the soft kicks inside of her. "No matter who you are, my little one, I love you already," she whispered softly. The truth would come in the morning. A truth that would not only alter their lives but also put their hearts to the test in ways they could never have predicted. The morning arrived with gentle rain drumming against their Arkansas windows. Feeling the first indications that her baby was ready to come, Abbie woke up before the sun rose. As if even the walls knew something sacred was about to happen, the home felt quieter than usual, and the air was thick with expectation. John David's face glowed with anxious energy and enthusiasm as he hurriedly assisted her in packing the final few items. "This is it," he muttered, kissing her forehead. "Finally, we will meet him." The journey to the hospital seemed to stretch on forever. Unspoken prayers and recollections of the months that had preceded this moment were present at every mile. John David whispered words of love and faith while holding Abbie's hand tightly, and occasionally gazing at her with tears in his eyes. Despite her sorrow, Abbie tried to smile and cling to his warmth, even though her heart was shaking within. Hours passed during labor, and she didn't want anything, not expectations, not disappointment, nothing, to ruin the happiness of this moment. The clean, bright room was filled with the soft noises of nurses and machinery. John David remained by Abbie's side, uttering prayers and words of support while her breaths came in heavy, short bursts. They both started crying in relief when the baby's first cry eventually filled the air. Their child finally arrived after months of waiting, marking a fresh start and a new life. However, the moment that would alter everything arrived. The room was silent for a while as the nurse stated, "Congratulations, it's a girl," with a loving smile. The happiness froze in John David's eyes. Something inside of him faltered as he attempted to smile. His palms trembled for a different reason than the thrill that had caused them to do so seconds earlier. His heart felt oddly heavy as he gazed at Abbie, who was holding their baby daughter close and had tears of pleasure shining on her face. Abbie saw it right away. She had been hoping for that expression of unadulterated joy, but instead she saw bewilderment in his eyes. Abbie said, "She's perfect," as the nurse carefully put the baby on her chest. Her voice cracked slightly from emotion and the weight of understanding what this meant. She fell in love with her baby right away, madly, utterly, but she could sense John David's quiet in the room like a chilly wind. John David leaned in and whispered, "She's beautiful," but his tone lacked the spark Abbie had hoped to hear. As the hours passed into the first quiet night in the hospital, Abbie sat awake, watching their daughter sleep soundly in her arms. He kissed her forehead, then the baby's little head, but his eyes were far away, buried in the shadow of what might have been. John David's expression was unreadable as he sat by the window and gazed out at the rain. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. The room was filled with the calm breathing of their newborn and the soft buzz of equipment. Yet there was an invisible gap between them. Not at Abbie, not at God, not at the baby, but at the brittle optimism that had been steadily broken after so much time. He battled with remorse in his heart. He should be ecstatic, he knew. He was aware that every child is a blessing. Even when he didn't talk, Abbie could sense his anguish because his thoughts kept returning to the ideal of holding a son in his arms. A dream that now seemed unattainable. "John, please, don't let this moment slip away," she said to him as the nurse exited the room. Her voice wavered, not out of rage but out of anguish. "She needs to see your eyes full of love." She wanted him to see what she saw. Their daughter's purity, her heartbeat, and her small fingers were wonderful. John David nodded slowly and moved toward the bed. He took a seat next to Abbie and gazed at his young daughter. Something warmed inside him as she opened her eyes for the first time. He He smiled, a genuine, if slight, smile for the first time since she was born. "She has your eyes," he whispered softly, and Abbie grinned despite her tears. She muttered back, "And your nose." Despite the slight restoration of warmth, some of the ecstasy was still hazy. The Duggar siblings called to offer their congrats, the family sent greetings, and social media quickly became overflowing with posts about the newest Duggar baby girl. Everything appeared to be ideal to the outside world. Another gift, another happy arrival. However, there was a silent tension between John and Abbie that no one else could notice. That night, John David remained awake next to the cot as Abbie eventually fell asleep. He observed his daughter's gentle breathing as her small chest rose and fell. He experienced intense, all-consuming love, yet it was tinged with remorse. "Lord, please pardon me for feeling what I shouldn't," he said quietly to himself. "Help me see her the way you do." Outside, a calm wind blew through the night and the rain had stopped. John David understood deep down that this was just the start of a lesson, and that their bliss would not cease. A lesson about acceptance, love, and realizing that blessings don't always appear as we want them to. Days became weeks following the birth of their third daughter. To the outside world, John David and Abbie Duggar appeared to be the epitome of contentment. A devoted couple fortunate to have another kid in good health. They shared gratitude, grins, and clothing that matched on social media. The first few days after returning from the hospital were serene but somehow empty, but beneath the filters and captions, there was an unsaid weight that pervaded their house. Abbie had anticipated that John David would be just as engaging and lively as he had been with their other two kids. However, he appeared more subdued and preoccupied this time. He worked on his plane, or fixed minor issues that didn't actually need to be fixed for long periods of time in the garage. He would simply smile and respond, "Just tired, that's all," whenever Abbie asked how he was feeling. However, she could sense the growing distance between them, one that was made of sadness rather than anger. Abbie spent her days caring for the baby and their two daughters, frequently with little sleep. She would watch the baby's small chest rise and fall while humming quietly to her in the silent hours of the night. Deep, gentle, and inquisitive, the baby's eyes reminded her so much of John David's. That's what she wanted him to see. She desired for him to experience her emotions. But his affection appeared constrained, almost cautious, when he entered the room, as though he was hesitant to commit himself fully. One afternoon, Abbie saw him sitting on the porch, gazing off into space. He had his Bible open on his lap, but his eyes were deep in concentration rather than reading. "She's growing so fast, John," she whispered gently as she sat next to him with the baby asleep in her arms. "Yeah, she's beautiful," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, but Abbie could sense what his heart didn't express. Although she wanted to cry, she refrained. Rather, she asked softly, "Are you disappointed that it wasn't a boy?" The question stunned John David, who turned to face her. He opened his mouth but said nothing. "I don't know, Abbie," he remarked with a sigh after a prolonged period of silence. "I am not dissatisfied with her. The woman is flawless." His words struck a chord with her. "I guess I thought things would feel different this time." Their honesty, not their cruelty, was the reason. She was aware of his affection for his girls, but she also knew that he was grieving quietly for the boy he never had. When he went to bed early that night, Abbie sat by himself in the living room and gazed at the baby monitor's gentle glow. "Why can't love be enough for him?" she moaned, tears streaming down her face. John David made a greater effort to conceal his emotions during the course of the following several weeks. He took their older daughters to the park, assisted with household duties, and occasionally rocked the infant to sleep. However, Abbie sensed that something was still missing from him. She could see the slight smile deepen on John's face every time someone from the Duggar family made a joke about, "Maybe next time you'll get your boy." Despite their good intentions, those remarks kept renewing the scar, which never completely healed, and Abbie started to feel alone. She missed the warmth they used to have, the way they would pray together at night, spend hours discussing their dreams, or giggle over trivial things. She loved her husband very much. Now they talked largely about chores, food, and diapers. Slowly but surely, their relationship was eroding. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Abbie finally lost it. John was making himself a cup of tea when she entered the kitchen and said, I can't keep pretending everything's fine." Her eyes were steady, but her voice faltered. "Although you are present, you are not with us." "Not at all. I can see how far away you've grown. Every time you hold her, I see it. You appear to be attempting to persuade yourself that you already ought to feel something." John remained motionless, the silence between them oppressive. His eyes were sparkling as he cautiously put down the cup. Under his breath he murmured, "Abbie, it's not that I don't love her. I do. I cherish each and every one of you. I simply don't know how to describe it. I fervently wished for a son. I firmly thought that was what God would provide for us. I felt like I had failed when it didn't happen. Maybe I didn't have enough faith." His remarks caused Abbie's heart to break. She approached him and touched his chest. "John, you were not let down by God. And you didn't let him down. He has this plan. Our young daughter is not in error. She's a miracle," John said, looking down with tears in his eyes. Unable to talk, he nodded slowly. He drew her close to him and held her closely for the first time in weeks, as though he was worried she could leave him too. That night, they prayed together once more, and this time, they prayed in a meaningful way rather than merely saying the same old phrases. They prayed for strength, forgiveness, and the capacity to discern benefits where there had once been expectations. However, the hush persisted long after the prayer was over. Rebuilding what disappointment had subtly shattered would take time, but healing had already begun. John David began spending more time with the infant in the days that followed. It was awkward at first, but gradually things started to shift. His heart melted when he saw her smile for the first time. He started to view her as the gift he didn't know he needed, rather than the daughter he hadn't expected. However, even as love began to blossom once more, Abbie couldn't get rid of the worry that one day her desire for a son would return, bringing with it the same misery that almost broke them apart. Slowly, the days went by, each one bearing a distinct burden. The once jolly Duggar house had turned into a peaceful haven for introspection. Although their two elder girls laughing continued to fill the rooms, there was a pause between John David and Abbie that was caused by fatigue rather than rage. In their different ways, they were both looking for a means to return to the tranquility they had experienced together. The majority of John David's mornings were spent outside, taking care of his tiny workshop next to the house. He reorganized tools, tinkered with engines he had previously repaired, and fixed ancient airplane parts. It was his haven, a place where objects could be disassembled and then put back together. However, he knew in his heart that a wrench or a silent prayer would not be enough to mend what was broken inside of him. In the meantime, Abbie made an effort to be resilient for her girls. She maintained their home as usual, had family gatherings, sang lullabies, and smiled. However, she always felt the emptiness next to her when the lights went off and the world became silent. As if his heart was still someplace else, somewhere between what he had hoped for and what he had received. John David would frequently go to sleep with his back to her. Abbie ended up standing in the nursery one evening. The infant, who was just a few months old, was sleeping soundly in her cradle with her small hands wrapped around a cozy blanket. There was a subtle scent of lavender and baby powder in the room. "You are everything I never knew I needed." Abbie spoke quietly as she ran her fingers over the baby's face, but her voice broke. "All I want is for your dad to see it too." She was unaware that John David was silently observing her from the door. He had come to see how the infant was doing, but when he heard her voice he froze. Her sweet yet forceful words struck him like a tsunami of reality. He had convinced himself for weeks that no one was harmed by his silence, and that he simply needed time. However, he realized that time by itself wouldn't fix things when he saw Abbie there, talking to their daughter so lovingly. He had to decide to love completely once more. John David put the baby to sleep that night, and then sat down on the couch next to Abbie. Everything they hadn't said was in the heavy air between them. They were silent for a long time. "I've been wrong, Abbie," John remarked softly after taking a long breath. Her eyes were open and tired as she gazed at him. His voice shook as he went on. "I never stopped asking God why I didn't have a son. I believe I just wanted power, but I persuaded myself it was about family legacy. I failed to remember that children are about him, not about me. I missed the wonder in what I already had because I was so preoccupied with what I desired." Abbie grasped for his hand while tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered, "I never needed a son to complete this family. All I needed was you. The man who held my hand when life got too heavy, laughed with me, and prayed with me. He was missed." Tears clouded John David's eyes. He felt his heart burst open, allowing the pride and shame to spill forth for the first time in months. "I apologize," he said in a tremulous murmur. "Though not truly here, I have been here. I allowed the joy that God provided us to be ruined by my disappointment." Abbie put her head on his shoulder and leaned in. "You still have her love," she said. "All you need to do is show her yours." Something changed the following morning. Before the sun had even risen, John David got up early and entered the nursery. The small lips of his infant daughter curled into a faint smile as she lay awake and stared up at the ceiling. Gently, he leaned over and took her in his arms. He simply held her there for a moment, sensing her warmth, her pulse, and her vulnerability. Then something exploded entirely inside of him. He started crying, real, uncontrollable tears of love and surrender. Not the silent ones of frustration he'd secretly cried. "I apologize, sweetheart," he muttered. "I apologize for not seeing you earlier. I could never ask for anything more than you. You are my blessing, my gift, and my daughter." Abbie's heart was swelled with relief as she watched from the doorway, tears running down her cheeks. She saw not only the father but also the husband, the believer, and the soul she fell in love with, the man she had been waiting for to return. John David underwent minor but significant changes after that day. He read Bible tales to his 3 girls at night, played with them in the backyard, taught them how to fix tiny things, and expressed his pride in being their father. He was reminded of grace rather than disappointment by the blue-painted nursery. Family members also observed the shift when they were there. One night, Jim Bob told him, "John, you've always been a terrific father, but you seem lighter recently. Happier." "I stopped waiting for a blessing I already had," John simply said with a smile. Slowly but surely, Abbie started to watch their love blossom again, in small, ordinary moments rather than in extravagant displays. The way he brewed her morning coffee. He held the infant as wife prepared food. The steady, appreciative tone of his voice as he prayed with her once again at night. At a family get-together months later, someone made the same joke. "Perhaps next time you'll finally get that little boy, John." This time, however, he just answered, "Maybe," and chuckled pleasantly. "However, I already have everything I need, even if I don't." Across the room, Abbie's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. Not the brittle type that crumbles under pressure, but the kind that arises when love triumphs over disappointment. "You found your joy again," Abbie whispered as they put their kids to bed that night. John grinned while cradling their infant. "No," he muttered. "She located me." With the exception of their daughter's soft breathing, the room became quiet. The reality finally sank into their hearts during that silence. Love always provides what you need, even if it doesn't always provide what you expect. And that was more than sufficient for Abbie Duggar and John David. Little things, like his daughter's laughter resonating down the corridor, the aroma of pancakes on a Sunday morning, or the warmth of Abbie's hand resting in his after prayer, might bring John David solace. The house was now a living, breathing reminder of grace rather than a site of disappointment. Their little kid had grown up fast. Her little hands were suddenly reaching for everything around her, and her quiet sobs had changed to chuckles. She gazed at John David with wide, trusting eyes every time he lifted her up. The same eyes that had once made him feel alone now filled him with something healing and pure. She was ignorant of her father's hardship and the silent sobs he had cried when he believed that God had forgotten his desire. She only knew that she was at home in his embrace. John and she would occasionally sit together in the early morning hours when the sun softly filtered through the nursery walls. She would coo in response to his quiet hums of ancient hymns and occasionally incomplete songs, her laughter wiping away any lingering grief in him. He would mutter, "You changed me," without even realizing it. After a long winter, Abbie watched this change come to life. The gentler, more modest, and more affectionate guy who had once slipped away in silent grief was back. He listened to her, prayed with sincere faith rather than guilt, and assisted her more with the kids. Sometimes it takes losing a dream to realize what a blessing truly is. she thought as she frequently observed him from the other side of the room. Inside their home, there was calm despite the fast-paced world outside, which included social media posts, family news, celebrations, and noise. John David wasn't living for other people's praise or going after expectations for the first time. He was just appreciative. The family got together for a little picnic in their backyard one evening. Laughter flooded the air as the field was illuminated by the golden light of sunset. John sat next to Abbie, their youngest sleeping in her arms, while their children played around chasing fireflies. "This is what I prayed for," Abbie muttered as she glanced around at her family. John gave a quiet smile. "Me too. At first, I just was unaware of it." Their fingers entwined as he grabbed for her hand. "For a long time, I believed that blessings should have a specific appearance, something that you could identify right away," he continued after a brief pause. "However, I was mistaken. Blessings can occasionally appear subtly, challenging us before they can cure us." His shoulder was where Abbie rested her head. She remarked, "That's the beauty of faith. You don't get what you desire from it. It provides you with what you require." As the sky faded, they sat quietly for a while, watching their girls laugh. As Abbie's little fingers curled around John's thumb, the infant stirred gently in her arms. His heart grew as he gazed down at her. "She's strong," he remarked softly. "She may not have the son I had hoped for, but she has bravery, which is something better. And one day, I believe she will transform lives." Abbie grinned. Ours was already altered by her. The world seemed to have stopped long enough for them to see everything properly, and the moment seemed to last forever. A breeze carried the faint sound of crickets as the sun dipped into gentle dusk. John David felt totally free for the first time in a long time. He sat down at his desk with his journal, which he hadn't opened since before the baby was born. Later that night, after the kids had gone to sleep, prayers for a son, hopes that had previously engulfed him, filled the opening few pages. He turned to a blank paper and wrote steadily and calmly, slowly, "God granted me everything I desired. He provided me with what I needed to understand the true meaning of love. He softened my heart by sending me a daughter, even though I begged for a male. He granted me life even though I pleaded for legacy. And the greatest blessing of all is that." With a sense of calm that was like a long-awaited dawn, he closed the book. Abbie was half asleep with their baby curled up next to her when he went back to bed. John bent over and gave them both a tender kiss. He muttered, "Thank you, not only to them but also to God, fate, and love itself for bringing him home." The Duggar family got together at church the next Sunday. As the pastor talked about faith and thankfulness during the service, John David stood quietly next to Abbie and held her hand. This time, the remarks resonated more deeply because they were facts he had experienced rather than lessons. Some of his siblings visited after the service to offer their continued congratulations on their expanding family. "Now 3 girls?" One of his brothers made fun of him. "Dude, you're outnumbered." John looked at his girls playing by the pews and laughed. He uttered the words, "Yes, and I wouldn't have it any other way." Abbie's eyes were shining with silent pride as she glanced up at him. The chapter of disappointment had finally closed. She realized in that brief instant, not because it had been erased, but because it had been redeemed. The family gathered around their supper table that evening. Everything felt different now. The warmth, the laughter, the conversation. Deeper. Actual. Leading the prayer in a composed and earnest tone was John David. "Thank you, Lord, for all of your blessings, even the ones we didn't immediately acknowledge. We are grateful that you taught us that love is a daily decision rather than something we anticipate. And we are grateful that you trusted us with these daughters. Our joy, our teachings, and our light." Abbie was grinning at him when he opened his eyes, and there was everything in that look. Thankfulness, forgiveness, and the type of love that gets stronger after being put to the test. John David came to the realization that while love gives second chances, life doesn't always. This was evident as the candles flickered on the table, and the kids played around them. And the Duggar family at last discovered what they had been looking for all along. Not perfection, not expectations, but peace, in that tiny luminous house in Arkansas, beneath a sky full of silent stars.